Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm very excited to welcome in Tom Luongo, a former research chemist, anarcho-libertarian, and Austrian economist whose work can be found on sites like Zero Hedge, Newsmax, and more. He is currently the publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns blog and podcast. We're going to discuss Trump's tariff U-turn as he reduces tariffs on everyone except China and puts a 90-day pause into effect. Art of the deal or serious economic blunder? We're going to hear Tom's theory on why Trump's real target isn't actually China and who he thinks is in America's crosshairs right now. We're also going to discuss the digital euro, a legitimate project or an act of desperation by the EU elite, and so much more. This is an epic conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it. It's time for Tom Luongo. Tom Luongo, great to have you back on the program. Of course, we have to kick things off discussing Liberation Day, the aftermath of Liberation Day, and now how things have been shaken up by Trump basically putting a pause on 90-day pause, reducing the tariffs to 10% on everybody except for China, who is actually now retaliating. Now, interestingly, last time I had you on the show, you said Trump could be the most significant leader since Genghis Khan in terms of the impact he may have globally. Do you think that's playing out? And what are your thoughts on this? You know, is this the art of the deal? Was this 4D chess? What was it, a blunder? Was China the real target all along?
Yes and no. It's not 4D chess. It is a Zopa art of the deal. And China is only part of the target because the real target's the EU. The real target here, Jesse, is to find out the real plan here, the game plan was to snuff out who is and who is not a friend of the United States. We know already, that we already know I have a phone call. We already know that China and the United States are rivals economically. We already know that they have real problems, yada, yada, yada. But yesterday morning, it became obvious to me, like, okay, so what's he going to do with this tariff structure? And the first thing I noted wasn't China. Vietnam was easy. That was a fork against China. Right, like put huge tariffs on Vietnam because China was outsourcing a lot of stuff to Vietnam, and all of that. Vietnam immediately comes to the table. The first thing I noted was that the European Union got a 20% tariff, only 20%, by the way. And I know Trump is more angrier with them than 20%, and that the UK only got 10%. And then. It was interestingly enough, like somebody mentioned it to me this morning, and I have a friend over in, who's, financial guy over in England, and we chat DM on Twitter all the time. And he's like, I missed this, which is that Paul Krugman last week said, well, the European unions are clearly using the new agreement that Keir Starmer put in place, that they export to the U.S. through Northern Ireland, thereby getting around the extra tariff. And, what a shock, right? It's the Westminster Agreement. That's what we're talking about. And that's part of it. So, but there's a fork play there, right? So there's that whole UK gets 10%, the baseline that everybody got, and the European Union got 20%. And then when you looked at what happened over the course of the last week since Liberation Day, you note all the people that came to the table to want to negotiate, put money on the table and everything else, and who complained. Canada, the EU, not surprisingly enough, the UK, and China. Now, China makes perfect sense, but the EU and Canada really don't, right? That shouldn't make any sense at all if the United States and Canada and the EU are all friends, right? But they're not. And so what you have to now, if that's your hypothesis, Is that what Trump's really doing? Is he really going to war with the EU? Well, he's gone to war with them over free speech and our their Digital Services Act and free and finding all our companies for mean tweets and all the rest of it, and sending JD Vance over there to shake them down and dress them down for their anti-democratic behavior and their frankly anti-American behavior. Like, we don't have shared values. You people put people in jail for mean tweets, and we don't. You don't have free speech. You're a bunch of authoritarian heads. So, was that correct analysis? Yeah, it is. Because here's what happened yesterday. So I wake up yesterday morning, getting ready to do my Wednesday report that I do for my patrons, and I've got to sit down. I got to take a look at the land, and it's tariff Mageddon day, right? And I'm waking up, and the markets are down a lot, and okay, whatever. After yet the day before, what are we going to talk about? Clearly, we're going to talk about everything. The market's melting down, and then, but the night before, somebody started mentioning the basis trade. Now, the basis trade is basically, hedge funds betting against or with the small trade that they can make, a couple of basis points between Treasury futures and spot Treasury prices, for all intents and purposes. That's what it comes down to. And the swap spreads are blowing out. Some of these basis trade is blowing up. Okay. Zero Hedge runs a great article at the top of Zero Hedge. It's behind the paywall, but it's a great article. You can find it. It's actually worth the $30 for the month just to read that one article. It'll save you thousands of hours and thousands of dollars and hours and time and everything else if you understand even half of that. But I'll try and summarize it. You have big hedge funds like Citadel, Millennium, and others have all put on massive amounts of leverage in these basis trades because individually they don't make a lot of money. But if you lever them up 20 or 30 or 50 or 60 times, well, then you can start making a lot of money at it. Now, these are the same basis trades that blew up SOFR in 2019. The SOFR crisis of September 2019, or what we know of as the repo crisis, but really it was a SOFR crisis, which forced the Fed to come into the market. Then it blew up again in March of 2020 when the U.S. Treasury market went bidless. It probably was part of what was going on during Silicon Valley Bank. It's probably blown up at other points in the past. So the first thing that popped into my head was, oh, look, it's the same thing we've seen before. Now, I want to ask the first thing that happens to me is I ask the basic question, did these guys not learn their lesson the first 3 times this trade blew up and they had to get a bailout? Or are they banking on a bailout from the Fed? And moreover, like, how are they getting more capital to put these basis trades on? And how are they getting more capital, an order of magnitude more money now than they had 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? That's a good question. You should ask yourself that question. Because as opposed to asking why the market went down, you should be asking how it is that we could have these conditions that the market could do what happened. Because when you do that, when you ask that question, you're like, oh, was somebody laying a bomb inside the capital markets to be set off whenever they want? I go back to Archegos Capital. I remember when Archegos Capital blew up and Bill Wang had had pledged the same money as collateral to 7 different prime brokers and then and then aped Cathie Wood's moronic portfolio, and the trades moved against her and Archegos Capital blew up. Like, Bill Wang is a convicted felon and money law, and embezzler who did time in jail. And then somehow this guy gets billions of dollars, and the trust over time of Goldman, Morgan, HSBC, all these prime brokers, Credit Suisse, and they're in trouble after Archegos Capital blows up. And I'm like, oh. And I wrote an article about this, and I called it Archegos Bikini Atolls, right? Bikini Atoll being the place where we tested the atom bomb. And I said, look, these things exist within the market. If you're China or you're whomever, and you want to ensure that trade policy or monetary policy or whatever, goes your way, you leave landmines, bombs in waiting, ready to go off at a moment's notice that you can blow up the markets with and cause a panic, right? It just strategically, it just makes sense. If you posit that the global financial system is not a whole bunch of people hanging around singing Kumbaya and picking up nickels in front of a freight train, and more like an actual honest to God world war, which is what it is, then this is the way you have to think about these events in time. So Arcos Capital pops into my head. I say to myself, how did Bill Wang get all this money again? Well, clearly somebody was backing him. Who? Well, turns out it was likely the Chinese government, right? How does Citadel Millennium, all the other hedge funds, how do they attract this much capital to be able to put these basis trades on orders of magnitude more than they did before, or an order of magnitude with higher leverage than they did before? When we know these trades are going to blow up with a 10, 15 basis point move in the U.S. Treasuries. Could it be the same people that want to dump a whole lot of U.S. Treasuries onto the market to move them by 15 basis points to create a cascading default at a particular moment in time when they've already pulled out hundreds of billions of dollars out of the Mag 7 in order to cause cascading margin calls within the U.S. stock market at a time when Donald Trump has decided to go back to a previous, to start moving the world towards the previous monetary system and taxing system that precludes the necessity for things like, I don't know, central banks and all the rest of it. I wonder who would be interested in doing something like that. Could it be London? Could it be Brussels? Could it be Amsterdam? Because those are the guys that need dollars. This is all happening 9 days after synthetic LIBOR finally ends, and the last vestiges of the LIBOR synthetic system of posting each other's garbage as collateral with no to get access to liquidity with no real collateral being put on the table. And now all of a sudden they have to post real collateral and they can't. And so the basis trade starts to blow up. So they start repatriating, they start selling like NVIDIA, right, in order to get dollars, in order to keep the markets from blowing up. And everybody's reacting to the bond market blowing up and the move index moving and this, that, and everything else. All this stuff is happening. Dogs and cats living together. A Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is coming up over the horizon. And no one's asking the basic question, could it have been an operation? And whose operation would it be? Because who's really angry? Who's really angry at Trump putting tariffs on? Who's really our enemy? Who really wants to have control over the pricing of dollars? Do the Chinese want control over the pricing of dollars? Have the Chinese ever acted in any way, manner, shape, or form to ever make it clear in their mind and to anyone that they want the control over the pricing of U.S. dollars around the world? No. That's clearly the purview of City of London and Brussels. They've been doing it for years. The whole Eurodollar system is nothing but a complete miasma, right? I mean, of this stuff. That's what the USAID money was all about. It was M0 moving into the friggin' Eurodollar system, being printed by magic money machines at the Treasury Department under Janet Yellen. All this stuff that I've been complaining about for 4 years culminated in that moment. And I looked at it and I needed proof. But here's my theory. That was at 8:30. My proof is like I took one glance after reading this article at the cross market, at all the cross market stuff that I look at on a daily basis. The US 10-year, the UK 10-year, the euro, the pound, the yen, and the German 10-year bund. And the trade was right there in front of you. If China was dumping treasuries, the yuan, as Scott Bessent said yesterday, if China was dumping treasuries, that means they sell treasuries to get dollars. And now they got to do something with those dollars. They don't want dollars. They want to put those dollars to work. They got to buy something else. So, because they don't want their currency appreciating, so they got to buy something else with those dollars, right? So, if they were dumping, the yuan would have been rising, not rising. Yuan fell versus the dollar. Chinese were not selling. On the other hand, U.S. market is off by 20 basis points. UK is off by 20 basis points because they cannot allow the UK gilt to be trading greater than 40 basis points. They've been defending 40 basis point positive spread with the U.S. 10-year for like 3 weeks now. No lie, folks, 3 weeks. So that has to move in the exact same direction as the American market. But the German Bund is flat. And the euro is up from $1.89 to 110 and change. Sell treasuries, buy dollars. Sell dollars, buy euros. Buy euros, have euros, by German bunds, but the German bund market is so much smaller than the U.S. Treasury market, relatively speaking, that you can't flood them in without moving price. So all they're doing is maintaining 2.62 on the German 10-year and then allowing the euro to appreciate. It was the Europeans that were dumping treasuries. And here's the last piece of that puzzle. Ready? What have I been charting for the last 4 years since Powell started tightening liquidity on the world after he raised the reverse repo rate by 5 basis points? The European Union and its subsidiaries, and the Bank of England and its subsidiaries, over $1.1 trillion of Europe ex-Switzerland, not Switzerland, just the rest of Europe, $1.1 trillion net into long-term U.S. treasuries held by those central banks. All the way across the board, everything from the British Virgin Islands to Canada, Ireland, Belgium, where Euroclear is, Luxembourg, the Bank of England, everybody. That number now, they control almost $3.3 trillion as of the last TIC report, which is for January. We'll get the February data in about a week, and we won't get the April data until June. They always do this stuff because there's a 60 to 90 day lag time between so you can find out where the fingerprints of what they've been doing. Oh, and by the way, the TIC data gets restated all the time, and it's a freaking mess. And Thailand can always report the right data every month, but Germany can't. The UK can't. Why? Give me a freaking break. So they have $3.4 trillion collectively, the people who hate us in Europe and are angry with us for upsetting the old apple cart. And the Chinese have 750 billion. Clearly, someone has ammunition and the other one doesn't. The Chinese have been not accumulating treasuries or selling them for 3 years. They've held around 750 plus or minus 20 for 3 years now. And when they don't want dollars, they just dump them into the other markets. And they've been dumping them into the Southeast Asian markets that are short dollars. With the yuan denominated, with the dollar denominated yuan payable bonds that they started issuing. Not a lot of them, only $10 billion or something like that, whatever it is. But they started that process. They're using those dollars to buy goods and services with their other trade partners. The Chinese, and this is the big lie. I've been saying this for years and no one wants to listen to me. The big lie is that the Chinese manage their currency relative to the US dollar. That is a lie. There is almost no correlation between the China real exchange adjusted, the RER, the exchange something adjusted rate, and the US dollar. But there's a very high correlation between the Chinese real and a basket of the Singapore dollar, the Malaysian ringgit, the Thai baht, the Indonesian rupiah, and the Asian Tiger 5 and the Vietnamese dong. That's the reality of the situation. It's been that way for 15 years. So China is not the one selling here. China's going to retaliate because Xi can't lose face. And Trump is putting him in a box to negotiate. But the European Union, note, they were carved out as well from the exemption that Trump, the stay that Trump put in effect. If anybody retaliates, you get the horns. I'm serious when I say this. The target here is the European Union, not China, because they're the ones. But they are both bad. But in this particular instance, it was yet another opportunity for him to uncover really who is his enemy in trade and where their weakness lies. Because to blow off and to use a weapon like this one at this moment in time betrays a fundamental weakness. Dude, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, that's a real nice bluff that Trump pulled. I am flashing back to years sitting at the gaming table where I did this to my opponents, and I put one card on the table and then watched the other 4 people at the table go, what does that mean? And everybody, literally, I've done this many times. I'm not going to talk about the game itself. I make one play and everybody goes, "You bastard!" Like when you have 4 other people at the table all scream at you because you made the exact right play into that moment in time, you've read the entire game board. You've read everybody's hand, their deck of cards, their assets on the table, and you said, that's the firing solution. I'm doing that right there. Donald Trump is a master at this. As a guy who knows how to do that, I can see him doing it. And so I've been incredibly impressed by what I'm seeing so far. It's really kind of cool. That was a long answer, but I figured I had to like get it all out in one like big, chunk, and then we can go on from there. So.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC, silver, gold, osmium for all your precious metals needs. ARC SGO is the place to go. Owner Ian Everard is trusted and given praise even by his competitors for being one of the most honest and informative gold, silver brokers in the United States. And their special is Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh for $2.47 over spot, while supplies last. Take advantage of the offer by giving him a call at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Yeah, that was quite a lot to unpack. You're mentioning the main target being the European Union. How much does the war in Ukraine play into all of this, and what's going on with Trump seemingly trying to bring a peaceful resolution to that conflict, and the EU kind of kicking and screaming about wanting to carry it on until Russia somehow ultimately defeated? A lot of very smart people I speak to believe that Ukraine stands no chance of winning this war. And so how does this all play into it? Is this connected?
It is connected. It's connected because European policy is such that they need a convenient excuse as to why they need to trash their currency, replace it with something else, and default on their debt. And this basis trade blow up, the tariffs and all this stuff, like the end of synthetic LIBOR, like all of these things are tied to how and why they want to do this. And the war in Ukraine has always been their excuse to lever up, spend money, print money, and then they have to issue bonds to print that money. Right. The first thing they're doing is they're putting the Germans through a struggle session where they have to spend, they have to they have to raise a whole bunch of capital and blow through their budget discipline numbers. Right. The Bundestag, the zombie Bundestag that we currently have. Past all that, now we've got a new coalition coming in, headed up by the Der Merzenführer, and saying that we're gonna they're gonna like cancel free speech, and they're gonna do this, and they're gonna clearly the Germans are beginning to revert to type, and they're rearming. So, yeah, it all is all tied to that, and that's part of the reason why the German DAX has been rallying as hard as it has, and why the Eurostoxx 50 was lagging it. But really, this is very clear. France is making Macron is making a big move to consolidate power, along with von der Leyen in Europe. France and Germany are both trying to put the screws to Italy. It's all tied to their desire in Ukraine because they need the collateral. They can't. So now the real pivot is that since they're losing in Ukraine, the real pivot is to install their boy Mark Carney and as Prime Minister of Canada to now start a trade war with the United States in order to get access to Canadian collateral, all the Canadian mineral wealth and oil wealth and everything else, right? And you watched Mark Carney is going to morph into the biggest pipeline builder of the 21st century next to the Russians in order to get this done. You watch if he wins. I don't know that he's going to win. But I think the fix is already in. So, yeah, Jesse, I'm like, they're going to try that. And I think Trump is going to absolutely, he's going to do everything he can to make it abundantly clear to Canadian people that the United States is not your enemy. Your leadership in Ottawa is your enemy. And Pierre Poilievre, to my eyes, looks like Mitt Romney 2.0, running a conservative campaign to lose on purpose for his globalist masters. That's what I see. Now, I could be wrong, But it could just be that, Polyev is just bad at what he does. And, I've heard that too, but I don't know. Like the Conservative Party in Canada, I've not met one person who in Canada who has anything nice to say about Pierre. Let's just put it that way. Hell, half of them are angry at Daniel Smith over in Alberta for not being good enough at this point. They're really angry. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point of view. I actually interviewed Maxime Bernier a couple of days ago on the show from the People's Party of Canada. He's the only. I got to vote for the PPC. I mean, that's the only party to me that actually represents real change. They can't win. I mean, but Bernier can't become prime minister. My theory is that perhaps after decades of economic pain, a collapse, something like we saw in Argentina that allowed Milei to get elected, that we will eventually, perhaps 10 or 20 years down the road, see a Max Bernier type of character end up getting elected, but it's not happening anytime soon. Very interesting what you said about Carney. You're making me want to vote for him now due to all my oil equities in Canada.
I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong about this, but I wouldn't be that mercenary, dude. Mark Carney is the devil. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yes. you'll get look, and no matter who comes into power in Canada, you're going to get pipelines. Like, what I'm saying is that Mark Carney, Mr. Carbon taxes and carbon credits, and you're the carbon we want to reduce. Himself, like, is going to turn. Is going to have to do this because the Russians aren't going to give the European Union their cookie. Trump is clearly beginning to try and break off Southern Europe from Northern Europe. Like, this is another layer to the geopolitical game. This became obvious to me the other day. I mean, it's been a little obvious to me for a while, but what really tore it for me was when the European Union went after their latest round of funding for the Ukraine war, and it wasn't just Viktor Orban standing by himself. And it wasn't just Giorgia Meloni putting up a weak in Italy, putting up a weak protest and then voting with the herd. No. Orban, Meloni, Sanchez. I think it's Sanchez in Spain, Portugal, and Robert Fico in Slovakia all voted against it. And then you put that together with the fact that Trump is pulling large amounts of U.S. assets and troops out of Germany and Poland and moving them to Greece. And then we have the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu earlier in the week. And Trump, in effect, blesses Erdogan's takeover of Syria. He's like, you got to congratulate the guy. Somebody's finally, done something that hasn't been done in 600 years or whatever it is. He conquered Syria. Like, really done. You and Putin both looked the other way and allowed him to move in because you didn't want the Israelis to take it over, because that was clearly what was going on. Turkey moving into Damascus, even through proxies, has now cockblocked Israel's greater ambitions to move closer to the Euphrates River and have a direct air route to bomb and start a war with Iran. And he did. And the fact that Trump did this at the public press conference with Netanyahu sitting there, and then poured salt in the wound after Netanyahu was already angry about that, to say, oh yeah, well, we're opening up indirect talks with Iran and Oman for preparation of direct talks with Iran. And Netanyahu's like, I watched a video of, as Trump was speaking, of just Netanyahu's response. And it was, I mean, if you don't like Netanyahu, this was kind of delicious. And you watch that, and I now have to my next bon mot, those with Zionist derangement syndrome need to watch that really carefully, because Trump was clearly forcing Netanyahu into an uncomfortable position. That was a classic struggle session from my perspective, those two things together. So it's clear that what Trump is trying to do now, when you start to think about that, is Erdogan is Syria. Now we're getting somebody with the largest army in the region, between Iran and Israel. Erdogan has, for the most part, survived the latest attempt at color revolution against him. U.S. is moving assets into Greece. The entirety of the Balkans are starting to form up a defensive alliance. Italy is, Giorgia Meloni is in Washington today negotiating a bilateral trade agreement for Italy outside of the EU. And then, Spain and Portugal will do whatever they need to do, and the Brits still control Gibraltar. Like, what's setting up here? The only coastline the EU is going to control by the time this is all over is the French Riviera. And last I checked, the French Riviera, if it could have been developed into industrial and commercial ports, beyond yachts, it would have already happened. Because the French and the Italians have been, at war with each other at various times, multiple times over the last 700 years. But it's not. Therefore, you've got Rump Europe is starting to form. And you can see the wedge play. The northern border of the Mediterranean is becoming a line. Trump is trying to break them away from the northern currency bloc, the same way that Putin is trying to break Western control of the northern border of the Black Sea. And the Russians are now starting to take real territory in Ukraine and put real pressure on. And the EU is fighting a rearguard action to hold on to Romania. And that's nice, but they're going to lose Odessa. I'm telling you, they're going to lose Odessa. And I don't know if they're going to lose it this year or next, but eventually the Russians are going to retake Odessa and Mykolaiv. It's going to happen. If Trump is making all those other moves, and how is France or Germany going to rearm to the point where they're going to send the Poles in there? Because at this point, the French and German army and the British are so weak that the Poles could take over Europe. They have more tanks. I think they have more tanks. They don't have more tanks than the Russians, but they have the most tanks in Europe by far. Greece is second. Like, if the Greeks and the Poles finally just got tired of Germany, they could be in Berlin in a week. I'm mostly kidding at this point, but this is where you have to put your head. Okay. And I'm watching von der Leyen and the rest of them, they are really bad at this game. Really bad at it. But von der Leyen is not incompetent. She's not stupid. She's ruthless and vicious and mean, and she's consolidating power very nicely for herself in Brussels. But it's like she's consolidating power to become king of the ant pile. And Donald Trump is a size 14 boot. And he's got 2 gallons of gasoline ready to light the whole friggin' thing on fire before he steps on it. You're done. So this was why I believe yesterday's, the last week's worth of market action since quote unquote Liberation Day has been an European operation to try and create a financial crisis in the United States to weaken Trump. Strategically, it's the only thing that makes any goddamn sense. The problems within the U.S. and China are not solved by direct trade negotiations between the U.S. and China. The problems between the U.S. and China are solved by trade negotiations with Mexico, Panama, Canada, and the European Union. That's how you blunt Chinese ambitions. So, and at the end of the day, whether the narrative about China's demographic and collapse or instabilities are true or not, that's salt at the taste, folks. I'm not here to comment on that. I don't have a really strong opinion about that. I know you're shocked to hear I don't have a strong opinion about something, right? But that may or may not be true at this point, right? I don't know. But what I do know is that Xi can't lose face at this moment in time to Donald Trump. And then maybe that's something that's already been baked into the pie. Remember, Donald Trump is really good at sniffing out people's weakness. He's just very good at it. Okay. And it doesn't always look like, he is, but he doesn't care what people think of him out there. What he cares about is what people think of him in the room he's about to negotiate in. That's all he cares about. And he'll use everybody around him to, set the table for him. And that's what's happening right now. All these moves have been, in many ways, very, very predictable, at least in my mind.
So some might point out, based on your analysis, that Trump is fighting a war on 2 fronts if he's going to be kind of antagonizing China with these tariffs and also the EU, the whole scenario you've just laid out. Has he just identified that China is perhaps in too weak of a position to retaliate in any meaningful way, or is there a danger that that could escalate into a situation where it could become dangerous in some ways for the United States?
I don't think it'll get, if you're implying kinetic war, I'm not worried about that.
Or economically?
I mean, economic war. Look, the Chinese, everybody. The truth of the matter is that everybody still needs our consumer market. Okay, I mean, like that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Everybody's got a lot of dollar denominated liabilities out there, and everybody still needs our consumer market. Now, it's not to say that they, over the course of the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, or even 5 to 15 years, that will shift. That could shift. Of course, it could. But as of right now, the pain point is that very clear that the smaller countries still want to have access to our markets and are willing to, cut deals with the United States. And so now, but note, Jesse, this isn't just about tariffs. It's about everything. It's about currency manipulation, capital controls, aggressive blocking regulations, barriers to entry. As I was explaining to Marty Bent the other day, was on his show, I said, the reason why Trump targeted a 10% base tariff rate plus a tariff rate that would grind out half of the trade surplus, right, of the country in question or the bloc in question, was because he was trying to then now highlight the real problem, which is, and he said it yesterday in his pivot text, right, in the tweet he put out, or the thing he put out on Truth Social, and said, why he was putting a 90-day pause on the tariffs for these countries, but we have to have a comprehensive discussion about trade. It's not just about tariffs; it's about all of these other things. So he started with tariffs, then he wove in all the soft tariffs and the regulations and the barriers and all the rest of it. Notice how von der Leyen, right after Liberation Day, she says, yeah, let's go to a zero tariff regime. And he's like, no, not good enough. 90% of the way you cheat on trade is not about the tariff you charge. We know that, and you know it, so shut up. It's the same thing in Vietnam. So he immediately entered into the conversation for everybody. It's not just about the tariffs. So stop arguing whether tariffs are good or bad. But that was the obvious play from so he mentions tariffs. What's the counter to that? The classic British free trade central bank model. No, tariff bad. Hoot Smalley, Smoot Hawley, and blah, 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 blah. Like, tariff of abomination, blah, 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 like all this stuff. Like, it's like, really? And then all the libertarians fall for it, and they go out there and they be useful idiots for these globalist cocksuckers. And like, it's just, like, I'm trying to not be my normal, very, very spicy self. But I mean, at the end of the day, my disdain for these people just knows no bounds. But so we start with tariffs. They're going to counter with this. He goes, yeah, okay, here's the tariff rate. See, Trump's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. Oh, but it's not really about tariffs. How did he calculate those rates? Oh, he calculated those rates by grinding out half the trade surplus. Why is he targeting the trade surplus? Well, because now you go, well, how does the European Union or Canada run a $124 billion trade surplus with the United States? Well, it's not about the tariffs. It's about everything else. Bingo. Now we've educated people. Now we have a talking point that we can move the conversation forward to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. We need comprehensive bilateral trade agreements with these people. And we need to stop treating the European Union like they are a player at the table. Notice how von der Leyen keeps tweeting and Trump keeps not talking to her. He does not recognize her authority as the leader of Europe. It's hilarious. And it's excellent. And the next thing that's going to come out of their mouths is Trump won't negotiate with a strong woman.
Of course.
Because he's a misogynist. Like, no, Ursula von der Leyen is just, frankly, she's just not hot. Like, it's Trump. He has a weakness for beautiful women. Like,
And she is evil, I would say, down to her very core.
Exactly. Which is why she's no longer hot. because she used to look like Julie Christie, and now she looks like a vampire.
Yeah, that's what happens when demons possess you. But I want to talk about the digital euro here, because this is something that they're talking about advancing. You mentioned earlier that they want to change out their currency. Are they intentionally trying to default on their debt, bring in the digital euro, and use it as a tool of control? Is this going to be a form of CBDC? Is this just a desperate bid that's going to ultimately fail? What's your view on the fate of the digital euro and its impact potentially?
Yeah, they said they came out again this morning and said we have to go towards this because of the Americans embracing of stablecoins. They've been telegraphing this move for years. Soros has given you the freaking plan. Default on the debt, issue perpetual debt, and then, but what they needed to do, again, that's why Ukraine is important. That's why Canada is important, right? They need a source of collateral for a new system. And they need to get the Russians and the United States into a war that drains both of them. And they need to destroy the United States because they can't have a competition here. They have to be the least ugly girl standing against the wall at the dance. And all the guys have to fight over, a bunch of threes. That's their plan. There are no sevens left. Like, they killed them all. That's their plan. And good luck with that. Donald Trump's like, fuck you, tariffs. Jerome Powell's like, yeah, I'm holding rates at 4.5%. I mean, we got the CPI this morning. And Powell now has the cover, if he wants, to cut interest rates by a quarter point and alleviate the inversion in the belly of the U.S. yield curve. This is what I've been screaming about for weeks. I'm like, Powell's going to have to cut rates just to get the yield curve back to normal because they've been selling 10s and 30s and they've been buying 1s and 2s. These people, it's very obvious what they've been doing. And you can see it. And I chart the internal spreads, the 1 month, 2 month spread, the 2 month, 3 month, and all the way out the yield curve. And you can watch over time. And I have a big chart of it that I post for my patrons every Wednesday and every Sunday when I do my market reports for them. And I'm like, this is really important because it's telling you what's happening and it's telling you what narrative they're trying to sell. What are they trying to sell? They're trying to sell this big, huge global recession or depression because of Trump's tariffs and blah. And again, like I said, state marshmallow man is coming over the horizon to like wipe everybody out because, like that's where we are. And it's apocalypse. It's the end of the world. No, it's not. It's the end of your world. Oh, well, you could have chosen not to fight. You could have chosen to like stop being, a terrier, but they can't help themselves. Like, these are people that know who don't recognize that anybody is a greater power than them. You mentioned it earlier and you said this is what happens when demons possess you, right? They want unlimited power and they don't recognize boundaries on their behavior. And they put people in place that don't recognize boundaries on their behavior. And then, they're suffused with a kind of arrogance that is going to be their downfall. I don't see Xi and the Chinese in general to be that kind of people. What I see is they're going to take every advantage they can for as long as they can, and then they're going to go negotiate a deal. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. They're going to be tough negotiators. They're going to try and cheat like you wouldn't believe. But so what? Can you begrudge them that? Like they've been told for 30 years that the United States doesn't know how to manage themselves. Why should, they've been running a mercantilist empire for 35 years longer than anybody should have ever been allowed. And they've been, why would they want to give that up willingly just because, creamsickler Mussolini comes to power and says, we're not doing that anymore. Like, we'll just wait the United States out. And maybe we'll get, maybe we'll get Joe Biden back, or we'll get Barack Obama back, or maybe Gavin Newsom will successfully split California off and we'll, from the United States. Yeah, good luck with that. And, I know they're still playing the cards that they think they have. It's fine. Let them raise tariffs. Let's start a trade war. Fine. Great. Whatever. And everybody will have to stop buying a bunch of cheap shit on Amazon for a month. Okay. I told my daughter last night, she saw the pair of boots that I bought the other day, and she's like, those are really cool. Where'd you get them? I said, I got them on Amazon. I said, you better buy a pair. If you want a pair, you better buy them quick because they're going to go from 50 or 60 bucks to 120. And then you're going to be like, looking at the Red Wings going, oh, that's a pretty good deal. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be, I guess this is where we are.
Well, another topic of discussion.
I buy cheap shit from China. I'm not, I'm above it. I don't care. But I also don't mind buying stuff from the United States either.
Another topic of discussion I want to dive into is the Epstein files, why they haven't been released. And we cannot do that here. However, it's generally too sensitive for YouTube. So I want to jump over to Rumble with our Banned on YouTube series, and we will discuss it. So search for Commodity Culture on Rumble for all of those who want to see that. But for now, Tom, tell us about Gold, Goats, and Guns and your Patreon and your X account, anywhere else you want to send people.
Sure, Jesse. Thank you for the opportunity. As always, thank you for the invite, and I really appreciate coming on the air. You can follow me on Twitter at and I keep dead naming it because it's still Twitter to me. TFL1728, and I think my Twitter feed's hilarious. I also know that it's obnoxious, and that's kind of fun. You can follow me on Patreon, and you can subscribe to the service that Dexter White and I put together. Patreon.com/Gold, Goats, and Guns. You've got twice weekly market reports and private blogs, as well as the monthly newsletter where we have a portfolio strategy, and that's where Key and I really take our deep dive, looking ahead as to where things are going next. It's it's that skunk works of intellectual skunk works about where we're going. And of course the blog at tomluongo.me. There's the podcast as well, which is really what the blog exists now to curate, the episodes of the podcast, and really recommend some of the recent episodes I've done with like Martin Armstrong, and the one I did with Chris Sullivan, I think of my friend Chris Sullivan over at Hyperion Decimus. I think is really important if you want to understand some of the plumbing stuff. I think that one was really good. I'm hat tipping to Chris, not me. It was his idea to do that podcast that way, and I'm like, let's do that. So, well, let's do it.
Great. Well, I'll put links to all of that in the description below. Tom, it's been a blast. I'll see you over on Rumble.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us today. This episode was brought to you by ARC, Silver, Gold, Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, be sure to check them out and take advantage of their special right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh at only $2.47 over spot. While supplies last. Give owner Ian Everard a call at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. I'll see you guys over on Rumble for the conclusion of this interview. Search Commodity Culture there as we dive into the Epstein files with Tom Luongo. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.